clinical psychologist, and Bobby invited me down today to talk about mental health, which is obviously what we're raising money for today behind. So I currently work in the NHS. I've worked in mental health for about 10 years through a spectrum of different places, everything from an inpatient psychiatric ward to a forensic unit to out in the community. So now I work with children and families in Newham, which brings its own challenges. Newham is one of the most deprived boroughs in the whole of England, so there's lots of kind of housing issues and wider social care issues, but it's very rewarding work to work with young people and families. Has anyone got any questions about that? No? That's just me and where I work. So today we'll be talking about mental health, thinking about the stigmas that are associated to that, trying to break it down a little, and also think around together what different mental health difficulties may look like and where to get support. So just to start, so we can have an idea and a defined notion of what mental health is. What does mental health mean to people? Just shout out anything. What does mental health mean?
A really difficult time.
Okay. Okay.
For me,
Yeah.
I've suffered with it, so family member it's quite like intense paranoia, or like just someone doing something that you don't.
Okay.
I think it's an aspect of your overall health, physical and mental health, but it's something that's been ignored for a very long time.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. So just in case people didn't hear that, an aspect of overall health that's otherwise been overlooked. What other words or ideas come to people's mind at first instance when we talk about mental health?
How we cope with mental health and work.
Work, yeah. Work, obviously we're all working a ridiculous amount of hours, and that obviously impacts our well-being as well. So what I'd like to highlight is that when we talk about mental health, there seems to be a taboo around that that's different to physical health. So when we talk about physical health, we talk about our physical body, our muscles, our bones, our blood. I'm sure all of us here in the last year have gone to the GP about something or taken a paracetamol for a headache, and that's physical health. Yet with mental health, we seem to separate that like it's a separate entity, whereas actually mental health and physical health are what makes us us. And every single person here has mental health. So mental health is your psychological and emotional well-being. That's your thoughts, your feelings, your experience. And actually it's along what we would call like a continuum. So sometimes we're in the middle, and sometimes our well-being is really good. We're at this end, we're thriving in life, we're fit, we're exercising, we're happy, everything's great, it's rainbows, it's wonderful. And sometimes we just veer across over here and things become a bit hard, we have a bad day. And along that continuum, we get to a point of feeling distress. And that's where mental health difficulties come in. So mental health is something that all of us have, but we could be in a positive well-being, or we could be at a point of experiencing distress and difficulties. And that's where the different challenges are coming in our life. Does that resonate with people, that we slide along that continuum at different times? Yeah. Has there anyone got any questions about that, or comments, or anything to contribute?
So how can we overcome that, like, initial feeling of feeling down and stuff? How can we get past that?
I think at first it's about noticing that we feel down. So later on in the talk I'll speak about how we can manage different distress, who we reach out to, and what we do. But I think we can probably all relate to having those great days, but also having those bad days that are really, really blue. Okay, so why do people think that there may be stigma associated to mental health difficulties? It's not talked about enough, okay, yeah.
I think with some people it can also, there's for some reason it's like a sign of weakness, especially amongst men. So I mean, not to make the sex to it, but I think it's probably a bit for both. I think definitely for men, for you to talk about it, it could be shown as a sign of weakness.
I think it frightens them.
Yeah, it does.
Well,
Especially men.
Yeah.
There's a stigma of fabulous as well.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like
Okay.
Sirens.
Yeah. mad. Yeah, they're mad.
Yeah.
Well, it was something that was never discussed, wasn't it? I mean, it was, you know, many years ago, it was, you know, it was the person in your family you didn't talk about.
Yeah, brushed
Because, you know, you just didn't want people to know that you've got a... People would say, oh, you know, my nutty aunt or whatever.
Yeah.
And without actually thinking about the fact that they weren't well.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so
Dismissed, wasn't it, really?
so it's almost, so what we're saying is that the taboos associated to mental health is that it's not talked about enough, that there's a fear of madness, that it might be a sign of weakness or vulnerability. Especially men, yeah, there's the old notions of asylums and all of these kind of, absolutely, yeah, and confusion perhaps by the person experiencing it, but also by those around them as well. So I picked out some random kind of statistics around stigma that's associated to mental health. So 90% of people who experience mental health difficulties said that it impacted, 65% of those people said that it impacted their friendships. So in some way it may have been the mental health difficulty getting in the way of the friendships, or it may have been the friends around them and how they were relating to the person, whether they supported them or whether they didn't understand them. And then 26% of the people experiencing stigma, being discriminated against, felt that they wanted to just give up on life. They felt too prejudiced by society that actually it was just enough. Another interesting fact I found was that people with a mental health difficulty, a diagnosed mental health difficulty, said that they didn't share that difficulty with anyone, friends or family, excuse me, for the first year of their experience.
I think that's sometimes really hard for people to... sometimes it's a weakness when you've got a mental health difficulty. To share that as a weakness is really hard for people to explain.
And what do you think stops people from sharing that with others? Even friends or family, our loved ones around us, what stops us from sharing?
People think like disrespectful.
Disrespectful?
Embarrassed.
Embarrassment, yeah. Shame, yeah.
And I think sometimes people think that they can deal with it by themselves and they don't want to bother anyone.
Yeah.
Oh, actually, I'm fine, I can deal with it.
Yeah.
If you tell your
Yeah.
loved ones that you're sad, they're going to
worry,
they're going to feel responsible for your sad.
Yeah.
It's funny that association even happened, because it's like you tell your family you get a cold, wouldn't you? You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
You just brought up the physical, you just brought up the side of physical, mental, and there being not really much different.
Yeah.
Because it's not like if you've got a mental health issue, that's it for the rest of your life. You're not going to have a cold for the rest of your life. It's like you can have a mental issue for a week, you know, or some people have a mental health issue for a day.
Yeah.
You know, just have a bad, you know. So it's funny how that's happened, I think.
Absolutely.
You can't tell about somebody feeling ill anyway, you know.
So if we use that as a comparison between physical and mental health, perhaps if I broke my leg, I would feel fine telling my employer on Monday, actually, I can't come into work. But if there was something different, like actually I've had a bit of a meltdown over the weekend, I've had a crisis in my life.
You just go to work.
Yeah.
Or you'd pretend you had something else wrong with you and really sick.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's something about the mind, it's invisible as well. So with physical health, sometimes we can see it more, or we can put a label to something a bit more. But and actually along the line of work, another statistic was that 57% of people with a mental health difficulty, that stops them applying for a job. So fear of shame and discrimination in the workplace as well. So this is really highlighting how it can impact our life, and it's a really big and real thing that we need to bring to the conversation and start kind of acknowledging and raising awareness to challenge that stigma and discrimination. Okay, so when we talk about mental health difficulties, so we're down this end of the continuum when life is hard, it's throwing us challenges and we're kind of struggling to cope. What comes to mind? What might that look like? What kind of names, or what do people know about mental health difficulties? Depression, okay. Despair. Sadness. Sorry. Anxiety. Yeah.
People don't go to work.
Yeah. Not going to work.
Don't want to go to work.
Yeah. Low energy. Psychosis. Yeah. Okay. So we've had a real mixed bag there of people naming both the diagnostic terms like depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, and also about the emotional feelings, the mental and emotional feelings that are perhaps low energy, feeling despair. And what I want to encourage us to think about today is actually perhaps the experience of mental health is beyond a label. So for example, in my work, I may meet two individuals or two teenagers who are referred by the doctor, and they both have a diagnosis of depression. That word depression is a very big label. The meaning of that, as in the symptoms of depression, may look like feeling low, having low motivation, not being able to get out of bed, etc. There may be a commonality there, but I've never worked with two people of the same diagnosis that have the same challenges in their life. So what I want to highlight is actually every experience is unique, that every individual has a very different psychological and emotional well-being, and the life experiences that they've had are both very, very different to one another. And we need to start as a society to break down that stigma by looking beyond the labels that we put to people. So sometimes diagnoses can be helpful, they may be an answer to people, but other times they can be something which are very labelling, which then can feed into stigma. So perhaps when we maybe know someone who has an experience of depression, perhaps we stop talking about them being a depressed person, but we talk about them being someone with low energy, who suffered a relationship breakdown, who's having a tough time at work, who's meeting stress and challenges in their life. And that allows us to better be able to relate to people as well. And it stops that sense of separation where we other people, whereas actually we're all here together. And like I talk about that continuum, that we're going to slide along it at different times. And when life throws shit at us, which it will do, when shit does hit the fan at different times, that's when our mental health can go towards that way. So we need to think about, in society, how do we appreciate that can happen to any of us at any time. Has anyone got any kind of thoughts they want to add to that, or any other comments? Sorry?
I think it can be a
Yeah.
stigma for the person with the diagnosis.
Absolutely.
Some people are looking for a label,
Mhm.
and the label is not sometimes they start thinking about their low energy and they're not isolating themselves.
So I think the point that's being highlighted here is how a label itself can be stigmatising for the individual, and how that in itself can be what we call quite self-fulfilling. As in, once you're given a label, then you can become that label, and it becomes a vicious cycle. And that vicious cycle might be across thoughts, it might be across behaviours, it might be across feelings, but they all come together, and the more they come together, that cycle escalates and it's harder to break away from.
But then it's very difficult because without the label, people find it very hard to get help.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
the label is needed.
Yeah. So sometimes we need to work with the system, don't we? We need to come to the NHS and say, hey, this is the treatment I need, this is the intervention I need, this is the therapy I need, but actually acknowledge your own individual experience within that, and not kind of, be stigmatised by whatever diagnosis has been given. Yeah.
About some people that this doesn't sound like those, you know how some people self-diagnose, so they've had a really bad day and they're like, I'm depressed.
Yeah.
Do you think that's because now it's more talked about and the word is kind of more out there, and people do you ever get people come to you and say, look, I've got really bad depression?
Yeah.
And then when you talk about it, it's maybe not depression, they've just had a really bad week, or how, like...
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I think a lot of that is in the language that we use in society. So, the word depression and depressed has become very normalised. So like you said, I've had a terrible week at work, I'm feeling really, really depressed now. But I guess at the point that I work in at the NHS, and that's in terms of like resources, people are only going to get to see like a psychologist actually once that depression is very, very distressing.
So do people sort of come, not to you, but they might go to a doctor and say, I'm depressed?
Yeah.
Then I guess get to the next stage where you're like, yes, you've got a little bit, you've got depression or anxiety.
Yeah. I think talking to people, finding out how long have they been feeling like this. So if a friend came to you and said, I've been feeling really depressed, is it actually you know, how useful questions to ask are how long has it been going on for? What is it stopping you from doing? Maybe even doing a scale rating, like 10 out of 10 is happy, 0 out of 10 is sad. Where are you on that? Are you experiencing any thoughts or urges to hurt yourself or other people? Where you know, is this someone that's had a bad week at work? Or is this someone that's actually been very withdrawn, isolated, sitting under a dark cloud for a year and not told anyone? And I think being sensitive and supportive people around each other is the way to do that. So talking and finding the help and support that you can. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think I was going to talk a little bit later about in terms of where to seek support. But obviously everyone has a GP, and I think GPs are getting better trained now, aren't they? At kind of linking. Okay, yeah, that's a NHS intake, I think. Some doctors, we hope most, are fantastic at signposting. Yeah. I was going to talk about a metaphor that a colleague of mine explained, and I think it's a really useful way to try to manage our thoughts. So we have over 50,000 thoughts a day. All those thoughts are random, we can't necessarily control them, but we have an equal amount of positive and negative thoughts. But when we're feeling down or having that bad day, it's almost like the negative thoughts are bigger, they're stronger and they're glaring at you. And we almost put our attention to the negative thoughts rather than the positive ones. So a metaphor that a friend of mine used was about like a postal system or an inbox system, whether you're kind of vintage or down with the digital age, I don't know. But so you have your good mail, which is, for example, an invite to a wedding, a birthday card, the tax rebate that never ever happened. You have the mail that comes through and says, okay, they're the necessary mail, like I have to go to work today, there's a bill to pay, it's the jobs that have to get done. But then we all get junk mail. All of us, we get junk mail on our inbox, we get the kind of pizza leaflets through the door, we all get junk mail. So if you think of that different system of mail in your head, we have a layer of good thoughts, we have the necessary thoughts, but then we also have the thoughts that say, I didn't do so well at work today, or I should have done better at this, or I'm not as good as that. And actually we need to find a way to not just manage, but in the first instance, recognise when those thoughts are happening, and try and be able to give more attention to the good thoughts, because they're the ones that easily slip away, and acknowledge and notice and be aware of the junk mail thoughts that are coming through to our head, the ones that don't serve us, the ones that we want to say, okay, you're trying to make me feel anxious about something, because when that junk mail comes through, if we start to give it attention, then it escalates. If I think I'm not good at enough at something, then that problem becomes bigger and bigger and bigger, and it grows very, very easily. So we need to find a way of noticing and observing, being aware of our thoughts, and trying to filter them in a different way so that we don't react, so that they don't escalate.
It's all about having spam filters.
A spam filter. That's what we need. A protective spam filter on our head. Yeah. Absolutely.
Sorry, I was going to say, so if you have a diagnosis, say, maybe not depression, but psychosis or OCD, they're very thought-based, so do they still have like those 50,000 thoughts? It's still exactly the same? Or do...
What do you mean?
I
Sorry,
guess
I'm not quite
I'm just
understand.
struggling to understand how someone with like some of the mental illnesses, when it's very much based on thoughts, tending to do something more like intrusive thoughts, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Is it that those thoughts still are just an equal sharing of that, those 50,000 thoughts, or do they grow? Like
I think
having depression or a mental health problem a shift in the balance of the thoughts?
I think you're highlighting a really good point, which is great actually. So the negative thoughts, we're giving more attention to them, we're more aware of them. So the positive ones are there somewhere. Actually, right now I I have my thought is saying I have a fear of contamination of germs and I need to go and wash my hands, okay? And because I need to go and wash my hands, I'm getting really, really anxious. But that's where all of my attention is going. Those thoughts are focused on that. But I'm forgetting the good thoughts of, I'm actually in nice company here, I'm having a nice drink, later on we're going to a party, I'm a good daughter, I spoke to my mum earlier. Those thoughts are kind of pushed into the background. And it's about sometimes the lens that we wear. So if I'm feeling really down or really low, it's almost like I'm putting on a pair of glasses that just make me see the world in a negative way. So then I would only look at the negative thoughts. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, it does. It's interesting. I didn't
Yeah.
realise that there was still the necessary and the good thoughts,
Yeah.
and that all equal.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it makes sense.
And one of the things that we do in therapy is actually trying people to not just notice and be aware of their thoughts, but to challenge them, so to find positive alternatives. But also it can be helpful to keep a thought diary, like write down your thoughts, what are the evidence for and against them. Also a really good intervention, which I know the loveliest Kaz, isn't it? Yeah, is doing later, is like a mindfulness workshop. And mindfulness is about not getting caught in a conflict with the thoughts. So yeah, I'm going to try and ignore them and avoid them and push them away and get in a battle with them. And the more you do that, they'll still be there. But if we can take a position where we're just observing them and noticing them and not reacting to them, then we can let them go and they will pass, if that makes sense. And that's what hopefully the workshop will teach us later. Yeah. It's great to have questions. Are there any more? Any more questions? No. Okay. So, there's another one. Yeah, go.
Just one point about the fact that you pay more attention to negative thoughts than positive thoughts. Actually, it's a non-bias called negativity dominance. And it's been estimated that we pay attention to negative things 5 times more than we do positive things.
It's
and there's
crazy,
actually
isn't it?
studies that have proven that it's like a longitudinal study on married couples that's found basically that couples that actually stayed married had more than 5 good interactions for 1 bad interaction. So yeah, maybe start doing some counseling.
But they notice the one bad thing, don't they? That's what they
Yeah, exactly.
Couples notice couples counselling.
Yeah.
But that's a
And they
crazy
notice
ratio,
the
right?
bad things.
5 to 1.
They can say the good things, but then they'll still focus on the bad things.
It's evolutionary, right? We've been wired
Well, it's rewiring, isn't it? And it's,
ourselves from the predators.
retraining your brain to think in a positive way. Mindfulness is a great way
Yeah.
of doing it.
It's all about
That's
the
what
spam
she was
filter.
doing. Yeah.
Spam filter.
Fun them. Okay, so in more kind of practical ideas about how to support either ourselves or other people experiencing mental health difficulty, just basic things that we all do every day to keep a good well-being. We have a routine, we get a good amount of sleep, we eat well, we spend some time outside. All of these things are very, very base, but are very, very easily lost. That element of self-care, very, very easily lost when we go to a point of not feeling so well, basically. And it's about looking out for each other to try and, support that both in yourself, but also your friend. And in a more practical way, obviously, friends and family may be the first port of call, but if you, for different reasons, don't want to speak with them, then you can go to a charity such as Mind, or there's lots of other amazing like charities and organisations in the third sector. There's helplines like Samaritans. There's your GP who can direct you to a particular NHS service. And I just encourage people to reach out and try and break down the barriers into whatever their experience is. I also personally use apps, which are great. So there's lots and lots of apps now for keeping in a positive well-being. So I'm sure quite a lot of you have heard about Headspace. And I started using that about 5 years ago, and it's just little 10-minute audios, just a mindfulness meditation each day, and I found that really, really grounding. It's very, very accessible, and it's something you can take with you everywhere. You don't need your doctor, well, maybe it's like your doctor in a phone, but there's lots of other apps as well. Like there's one called Mind Shift, Silver Cloud, Beat Panic, or Well Mind, and they're all very, very well used with different exercises and check-ins about your mood and well-being. So I think my main message in the talk is that although there's a statistic that in 1 year, 1 in 4 of us may experience a mental health difficulty, I want to highlight that actually maybe it's more about 4 out of 4 of us have mental health, and at some point we'll be sliding along that continuum with a really good day or a really bad day, and it's about trying to reduce the stigma attached to the taboo of mental health, to keep the conversations open so that we all find the right support for one another. And one of my favourite questions that I think is important, that I use both professionally and personally, and it's stolen from a lady called Eleanor Longden, who does a great TED talk called The Voices in My Head. And the question is not what's wrong with you, but what's happened to you. And I think that's something that we can all bear in mind in supporting one another. So thank you for listening. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer. Thank you for sharing.